Those are things that you want to go off of. And really what you find is that there are foods that people routinely eat and they may make them feel crummy, but because they've been eating them for so long, because it's such kind of a staple in the standard American diet, that they don't know potentially how great they can feel until they go off of it. Yeah. And that's what you find in so many people. And so, I put stuff out there, well, just try going 2-3 weeks off of gluten and see how you feel. And there are all these comments, let's say on my YouTube community page where people go, oh my gosh, I went off gluten and my joint pains went away, my rashes cleared up, my skin looked better. It's not everybody. There's some people who do just fine with gluten, but just try it. Same thing with dairy. I had a family member of mine who was having some health issues as a child, and we took that kid off dairy, which in traditional pediatrics, like, no, you got to feed your kids milk. And we took them off dairy and those symptoms went away. They were neurologic issues. Wow. And so, I think that there's something called bioindividuality where we all react potentially a little differently. That could explain the BII. That could explain what you're talking about with the implants that you have in patients who may have issues, where certain things impact some people a certain way that may not impact others. And traditional medicine is really good at doing large studies where we can say, hey, the majority of people, if they're in this parameter, should do fine. If they're outside of it, they may not do fine. But that doesn't necessarily explain the individuality of each patient, where maybe a high normal for one patient is really abnormal for them, where it could be just fine for somebody else.
Yeah, no, and that's super valuable because I think even the way we process diet, I mean, this, Asians are more lactose intolerant. We don't have the right enzymes to process dairy, and we sometimes habituate to it, so we're okay, but a lot of us can't tolerate dairy. So probably for whatever reason, we've adapted to be that way.
Yeah, and I think that there's, things that have come up overall, when you look at the overall diet and the standard American diet, and it's so different. I grew up in middle of Michigan in a tiny town, and my family was the only Asian family in town. And it was a town where it's all meat and potatoes. Yet my family, when I ate at home, what did we eat? We ate Korean food. So it's rice, it's fish, it's kimchi, fermented foods, it's garlic. These are foods that what they come from. Like they look like the plant or the animal that they came from. Whereas then I would go out to eat with my friends and we'd go to McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and stuff, and you'd eat these ultra-processed foods where you don't even know what they're made out of because they don't look anything like their original food form. The interesting thing is, I mentioned earlier free radicals and antioxidants. Fried foods and ultra-processed foods actually are filled with free radicals, believe it or not. And so a lot of people don't realize that those types of foods, because they've been so ultra-processed, that they actually will develop free radicals, and that can be damaging to your health in that way as well. And so simple things like trying to stick with real whole foods when possible, understanding that, hey, my daughter has a birthday party and we're having cake, then I'll eat the cake too.
Sure.
Okay. You have to live. But at the same time, if you are looking for optimal health, then some very simple steps is try to focus more on those real foods and a little bit less on those ultra-processed ones.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to think about the way our families, like when you come from an ethnic background, like there's things that we do that are probably so anti-inflammatory. So we have curcumin, or we have turmeric in all of our food, which curcumin is like all the rage right now.
Oh, yeah.
We have ginger, garlic, and everything. We often have yogurt with every meal, or with many meals, we'll have plain yogurt, and that has a lot of probiotics. Oftentimes, it's very cultural to go for a walk after eating dinner, which is great for reducing blood sugar. So there's just so many things that we do habitually that are beneficial that have come from ancient teachings.
And unfortunately, the standard American diet and the American lifestyle now has lost all of that. I mentioned kimchi, you mentioned yogurt. Really, when you look at, there's very few fermented foods that are in the standard American diet. Yes, there's yogurt, but that yogurt that we have is very different than the yogurt you probably grew up eating. This is filled with sugar and not necessarily the same type of health food. And the idea behind the benefit of fermented foods is that they're filled with beneficial bacteria that can help the bacteria in your gut, which is your microbiome. And really the only other time really that in the standard American diet that people eat fermented foods is like if you are at a barbecue and you have a brat and you put sauerkraut on it. But really that's it.
So rare.
Yeah. And so really that's something that really is missing. And so that's one of the things I do recommend. I briefly mentioned supplements is to take a daily probiotic, at least 3 billion colony-forming units a day, because our diet is so devoid of these fermented foods. When I grew up in my parents' house, we had fermented foods almost every day with kimchi. We had miso, that's fermented. Tempeh is fermented. So there's so many other options, but the American diet just doesn't have it. Like it's
Yeah.
essentially sterile.
Yeah, there's really not much. And then the other thing, you mentioned in your book, and I've heard this before, is that the soil quality from what our foods are coming from is really poor. And you mentioned a study in the book, and that was really fascinating. But basically, they've looked at soil quality. It's just like 70% less diversity or 70% less quality nutrients in the soil than there was in the past.
So it's an interesting thing. If you follow alternative health experts, they'll tell you that the soil quality is different. Industrial farming practices have depleted the soil of nutrients. And so our fruits and vegetables are not as nutritious as they used to be. And that's one reason why some people encourage people to eat organic, because there are some studies that actually do look at organic fruits and vegetables versus conventional and showing actually a higher nutrient profile. Not enough that if you can't afford organic, then by all means eat conventional grown fruits and vegetables. It's better to eat it than not to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was a study that you mentioned. It was a study from 1950 to 1999 looking at conventionally grown fruits and vegetables and found a reduction in 6 different nutrients, 3 of them being ones that to me were alarming, and that would be iron, vitamin C, and protein. When you're finding that you have a reduction in the nutrients in our fruits and vegetables, then it gets you concerned about, okay, what do I do? And that's why I'm a fan of supplements. The fact, though, is that you cannot out-supplement a bad diet, okay? And so you always want to focus on, once again, eating the real food, eating the rainbow of fruits and vegetables, eating a lot of healthy protein, especially as you get older. But at the same time, you add some supplements in there. I recommend a multivitamin, a fish oil every day, the probiotic. I also recommend collagen most days if you can do that, because I think that's really good for the skin as well. I think ideally you start going towards that optimal health that we really wish for everybody.
Yeah, tell us a little more about collagen. You wrote a lot about it in your book, and I found it very interesting. I didn't actually know that ingesting collagen was good for you.
Yeah, so collagen makes up 70 to 80% of our skin. And that is a part of our skin that causes our skin to feel tight and to be smooth and youthful. And we lose about 1% of the thickness of our collagen every year, starting about in our mid-20s or so. When women hit menopause, it increases to up to 2% a year. And that's one reason why, you see women who maybe are in their 70s and 80s and their skin can be tissue paper thin, and that can even tear just from like a scratch. And so one of the things we want to do as we get older is make sure that our skin continues to retain that collagen. So then the question really is, does it make sense to take collagen orally, or should you just put it on your skin? Well, collagen is a large protein. And the fact is that if you apply it on the surface of your skin, it's not going to do anything, because the skin is a barrier and it will not absorb that large protein. You're wasting your money on essentially an expensive moisturizer. But what happens if you take collagen by mouth? So the naysayers will say that it's a large protein, and if you take it by mouth, your body will absorb it on its own. There's no guarantee that that's going to make your skin better. And a lot of doctors believe that. And in fact, there is a cardiologist, real nice guy. He's got a big bushy beard. He's probably in his mid-60s. He also has a nutrition degree. And he made a video a couple of years ago basically stating that collagen supplements don't work. You might as well just have gelatin. And some of that comes from the idea of bone broth. And when bone broth cools, it becomes gelatin. That's pure collagen. So he made this video, and I saw it, and I'm like, oh, I really like this guy. He comes out with great information, but I'd have to disagree on this one. And literally like a month or a few weeks ago, I saw that video pop up again. Before the video ended, you can see him. He swipes the video away, and he goes, I was wrong. And I did the research. I looked at the studies, and collagen supplements do work. And I was floored, because how often do you see a physician, especially this is a guy who comes across very professor-like and very assured in his opinions and stating things as fact, saying that he was wrong.